Hi, welcome. My name's John Allen, and I'm the host of Alden New Haven, where once a month we take a different topic of interest to the LGBT community in Greater New Haven and Connecticut and explore it in depth. And today we're going to talk about our military veterans, but specifically LGBT veterans. In the military, there's been so much in the news about the military and about veterans that, and there are 22 million veterans in the United States that have served in several branches of the military. And if statistically we know that there's about 3.5% of that population identify as LGBT, that would mean that there's 1 million veterans that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender in the country. So today we're going to explore how we are able to help protect them through the VA health system. And we have several guests. We have Lynnette Adams, Dr. Lynnette Adams, a licensed clinical psychologist from the VA hospital. Bob Delaney, a veteran who was served in the Coast Guard. And Lacey Joy Whitefeather, a veteran who served in the Army. Welcome.
Thank you.
So I think I wanted to just open this up with one of our veterans was, why did you go into the military when you did?
A troublesome kid, and I was being chased by the police through the streets of New Haven. And I ducked down in the recruiter's office, and I was watching as the policeman's feet were walking back and forth, and to see, he was still looking for me. And my head turned around when he said, "You could leave tomorrow." I said, "I could leave tomorrow?" He said, "Yeah, you get your father or your mother to sign this document and you can leave tomorrow." And to me, that was the answer to my prayers to get out of the area and go see the world. So I love the idea of being a soldier. I grew up with John Wayne movies, and I was raring to go. So my father signed on a dotted line, and the next day at 5 o'clock, I was gone.
And you were able to get around and see parts of the world.
I sure was, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was probably, what time was this?
This was around 1965 to 1967 I served. And I went to basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. And then I went further on to Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Maryland, to get AIT training, advanced in individual training. I became a cook, and they try to line you up with something that occupationally you fit. Mm-hmm. So I was always my mother's helper in the kitchen, and that worked out well. And then they further shipped me down to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I was in a basic training unit. And every 10 weeks we got 250 new trainees to train for the service.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to explore more about that, about your time in the military. But Bob, can we hear, why did you go in?
Sure. In those days, we had the draft. You had no choice. When you turned 18, if you weren't going to college or advanced education in any way, shape, or form, you were drafted. Now, I was fortunate in that my time, my age, was between the Korean War and the Vietnam War. 1958, nobody was killing anybody. Mm-hmm. 1962, nobody was killing anybody. So I was lucky, and I thought perhaps I might be able to save somebody rather than kill them.
Right.
And that was a noble kind of thought for a 17-year-old kid.
Right.
And I thought the uniform looked pretty good, too.
That's great. Yes, so they do. Men in uniform always look good.
I beg your pardon?
I said men in uniform always look good. Right?
Well,
men and women in uniform.
The bell-bottoms did it for me. So.
That's great.
So that was it. That was the extent of it. I went to boot camp in New Jersey, somewhere way down the southern tip. And I went to electronics technician school. They thought I was a puddle of brains for a moment, and they gave up on that. And they assigned me to a ship, and there I was for a few years in the North Atlantic, and it was a wonderful experience.
Wonderful.
I was in the service with a lot of World War II guys. Their 20-year period was from 1942 to to 62, and it coincided with my last 4 years. So they mentored me in a lot of ways.
How wonderful.
Ways of the world.
That's so great.
Yeah, it really was.
Well, Lynette, these sound to me like very typical stories of how someone might come into the military. And I know that you've been doing so much with the VA hospitals here in Connecticut that I wonder if this is a typical story that you hear from folks, and maybe talk a little bit about what your services are.
Yeah, well, what I can say is no two people's story are exactly the same, but the themes seem to be, drafted or have family history. My parents did it, so I wanted to join. Like a feeling of wanting to serve the country, or maybe make a better life for themselves or get away. So those sort of things definitely come up a lot of the time, and I think, just in terms of what I see at the VA, I would say we get a lot of vets who are coming in who have reintegration challenges. So when they're coming back from wartime, or maybe historically, they never just really figured out how to reintegrate back into civilian life. Of course, many people don't have those issues either. But yeah, I'd say like the sort of things both of you have said seem to be pretty common.
Yeah. Well, what are some of the services that the VA offers, and specifically to LGBT people?
Yeah. So the VA, actually, there have been a lot of new programs that have started up in the past 5 years. Back in 2012, there was actually a new national program at central office for LGBT services. And from there, things really grew quite a bit. So new training programs, new LGBT care coordinators. So that's actually one of the roles that I do at the VA here at VA Connecticut. So we have support groups, we have transgender-related care, individual therapy. We train folks in all of the different clinics and programs, and we have the motto, we serve all who serve. So we really want everybody to feel like they belong at the VA.
Yeah, I think when I was looking at the VA website, it was the thing that struck me most was that it said that you want to provide respectful care. And I think that it just is so appropriate for our group of veterans who maybe in the past haven't been treated so respectfully.
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't know how much we'll go into it, but particularly with the history of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and what was before Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Yeah. And what was Don't Ask, Don't Tell? I think most people know about it, but some people might not really be familiar with what it was.
Yeah, so Don't Ask, Don't Tell was something put into place in 1994 it was meant to be a protection such that as long as you didn't talk about your sexual orientation, we weren't going to ask about it, you don't tell about it, and you can still continue to serve. But really, it did allow for people, and ended up like discharging a number of people, 14,000 people at least, under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. By the way, Don't Ask, Don't Tell never had any protections or lack thereof for transgender identified individuals. So that was not necessarily something that really honored transgender status, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So since Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed officially in 2010, but didn't really go into place until 2011, I think LGBT identified veterans have really kind of wondered, okay, what is the VA going to be like? Is that going to be a safe culture for me? And we've really never had any ban or Don't Ask, Don't Tell about folks coming to the VA. And we really, the Department of Defense is different than the Veterans Health Administration, so they're related in terms of who we've served. But we have our own policies and procedures, and we really want everybody to feel like they belong. And I feel like if you can create a welcoming environment for one person, it benefits everybody coming to the VA.
Right. And Bob, I know that you were very instrumental in trying to tap into some of the LGBT service members and veterans that are in the region with the support group.
Right.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about what that was.
Well,
and is it still meeting?
It was difficult to gather traction simply because it was still an unspoken or unapproachable kind of subject, I think. That was my own take. Keep
You mean
in
it's
mind-
still in the closet, even though it can.
Absolutely.
Even though we have this website and we've got information that we're trying to get out to people, it's still very much in the closet.
To this day. I appreciate the efforts that this lady takes. I really do. I really do. I'm a fan of hers.
Right. I think we all are.
Yeah, right. But they had, we had a few meetings, but it never really did gather traction, as I said. Keep in mind, as I was about to say, that in 1958, when I went in, it was considered a mental disorder.
Right. Oh, I
You know, you were thrown out with dishonorable discharge.
Yes,
You couldn't vote. They took your vote away from you, and finding work after that kind of discharge
Yes.
was impossible.
I know.
So people locked themselves into a closet and hammered it shut behind themselves.
Right, yes.
It was a brutal time for the gay community in the military.
Right.
It was terrible.
It would seem like when you go back and you look on at some of the pictures, and certainly in looking at some of your own personal photographs, it looked like it was kind of an idyllic time. You know, I mean, it looked like a lot of fun, guys hanging out with other guys and women being together, and yet it was always done with such secrecy.
Right.
And there was such danger if you crossed a line.
It really, really was. I'm sure you can testify to that too.
Yeah.
Lacey, right. You mentioned being approached while you were walking down the street one time.
Yeah. A sergeant asked me, pulled over, and he said, I was just a private, a peon. And he said, would you like a ride? He said, I have a nice air-conditioned car and all this. And he said, you can sit right next to me. I'm like, okay. But I felt kind of like, oh, so there are people.
Right.
You know, I'm not gonna be such an island.
Right.
So,
so you really felt that there
yeah,
was, it was.
I always felt that I was an island because there was no one. The word transgender was not even invented yet.
Right. Right.
Right.
So it made me feel a little more welcomed. You know, that there were others, and if they rose to the rank of Sergeant First Class, let's say, there's hope.
Well, I wonder, how do you feel now? I mean, you mentioned, being being trans aware when you were in the service. How do you feel that people are being regarded now as trans service members?
In the service?
In the service and as veterans.
Well, in the service, I can't say because I'm not in now. But I know that there's a lot of us that are identifying each other, and we're happy to get together and talk about old times just like any other veterans, you know.
Right. Yeah. That's great. I mean, there is so much in the news now about the trans, both trying to force trans people out of the service and whatever. But the websites certainly are very inclusive of trans people, and they certainly include transgender individuals in the statistics when they talk about the service. I mean, I mentioned that there's 22 million veterans at the beginning of the segment here, and so that means that there's 1 million LGBT, statistically, there would be 1 million LGBT veterans currently. But in active service, there's nearly 2 million people in active service, and the VA hospital says that 68,000 are currently active members, LGBT. 68,000 people that are LGBT currently serving in the military. So these are sizable numbers. So I think that, and this is a sizable community.
I think
very much,
it's also hard to be able to know that whether those numbers are even an underestimate, just simply because the military doesn't necessarily collect information on sexual orientation and gender identity. The VA doesn't collect systematically information on sexual orientation, so there's not a great way to measure. So a lot of the numbers that you're citing is really kind of projections on, well, if you have these many veterans and these many, and I really think that because of the history of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and everything that came before it, we wonder if people maybe just didn't really share and talk about their sexual orientation or gender identity, and so it's really hard to know if the numbers might actually potentially be higher than that.
Right.
I go to lunches and dinners and such with members of the gay community, and one of them is called Connecticut Prime Timers, for example, right? Up out of Hartford in that area, and
There's a branch here in New Haven too.
Brazi's.
Yeah, at Prime Timers.
I'm down there.
I'll probably see you there.
Every third Wednesday. It's a fun group.
Yes, it is.
It really is, right. Anyway, it's so the population I share my experiences with, or share what I've been witness to, is an older population. They're seniors primarily, and they excuse me, my chain slipped. Beg your pardon. So when I hear the stories, usually at a table of 10, for example, 8 of those people will have been divorced with children.
Right.
Out of 10. So I'm attesting to what you're saying. It was an underspoken, it's a lot more prevalent than a lot of people think.
Right.
I really believe that.
Well, just looking at the healthcare, I think are family members also able to participate in the VA health system as well?
So the VA does want to include families in care, although primarily really serves veterans. But there's a lot of different family-oriented programs and resources through the community that the VA can help kind of get people hooked up with.
Right. So that is good. I know that for my own employer, that my spouse is able to be part of my employer health plan.
Oh, really?
And how important that is,
Right.
as a financial incentive to have LGBT people in the workforce.
Right.
So I would imagine that, that LGBT people in the military would be penalized if they weren't able to have their family members included in the health plans, much like anybody else. Straight counterparts are able to have that service too.
Yeah.
So I wonder, one of the things that I think was so important is, how did you express your sexual orientation when you were in the military? And were you aware of it? I know, Lacey, you said that you were, but did you find a sense of community in the when you were serving in the military?
No. But I was able to, it worked well for me. I was 1,000 miles from home, and I was able to explore. At 17 years old, I was able to do myself up and get in my car and go different places and try to connect with people. It was very difficult on post because nobody would show their colors.
Right.
So
just getting away from home was a way for you to.
For me, it was fantastic. Yeah. It was just like it was like a proving grounds.
Right. That's good. Have you been able to? How about you, Bob? Were you able to find a sense of community?
No, not in the service. Those who I thought might have been gay were seized by the authorities and just thrown out of the service.
Wow.
And I never had experienced shipboard or even witnessed it. But once ashore, well,
it was a different story.
well, here
Port of
comes
call.
seafood. That's what it was, right? So it was another thing altogether, and I never mixed the two. And most of the people that I share these stories with did the same thing. They never, ever did anything while they were on active duty.
Right. So they're very careful about making sure that there were clear
Penalties
boundaries.
were ferocious,
Yeah, right.
socially, culturally. I often thought about the religious aspects to it. Who came with religion? Right here in Connecticut, I know quite a few elderly men who go to Mass on Sundays. They're gay, and of course the church discards their propensities.
Right.
But they're very devout Catholics or whatever they might practice. And so that's another whole dimension that isn't even spoken about in this context.
Right.
That culturally, the whole range of issues that come to play before terms can be arrived at within oneself.
Right. Now, do you feel that you've been able to find a sense of community within the military at all? Are you still looking for a military community, being true to yourself now?
Yeah, I try to connect with other people that have been in the service, and it's like I was saying before. It's good to get together to talk about things. All the commonalities of anyone else's service are pretty much the same.
Right.
So, but I do especially try to find people. I don't know. It's comforting.
Right. Yes. How about you, Bob?
No, I don't. Not as far as the military is concerned. I still am, I wouldn't call it being wary, but the opportunities for dialogue just aren't there anymore. I'm not shipboard with somebody sleeping up there, right? It's a whole different kind of time in my life.
Right.
So, but there are a lot of various organizations and directions one can follow, whatever their interests might be. There are cooking clubs, book clubs, movie clubs, clubs for the elderly, organizations for the elderly, on and on and on. It's a very diverse population, obviously.
Yes.
I can dislike as many people as I do like, which is often enough, right? Believe it or not.
It's easy to, I know.
So yeah, but as far as the military right now, it has no bearing on where I look or what I go to. I enjoy those dinners, and that's the extent of it.
Yeah. Well, when I was looking at the website and some of the things that the people, now that we have these active sites around the world and people are coming back looking for health care and for psychiatric care or just a therapist or whatever, are you finding that sexual orientation and gender identity are some of the things that are being discussed and people want to talk to you about?
Yeah, sometimes. I think kind of related to what you had just asked about finding a community, that's one of the things I think that the support groups that we have at the VA are very helpful with. So we have a support group that meets on the West Haven campus and one up on the Newington campus. And I can say that the folks who attend that group really appreciate knowing that they have a space where they can talk with other people who have been in the military, so have similar backgrounds, or maybe don't have similar backgrounds, but they at least have something where they can kind of talk to each other, lend each other support. The group on the West Haven campus has been going for about 4 years, and people keep coming back. Sometimes you have people who have been coming week after week after week, and then sometimes people just come in as they need it.
Right.
Particularly when things come up in the media. So, for example, in response to recent discussions about the transgender military policy, or back a year ago, June, after the Pulse shooting in Orlando.
Right.
Those sort of safe spaces where people can get together and talk are just so important.
Yes.
To be able to know I can come to this group and I can talk and people are going to accept me for who I am.
Right. Now, you made a good distinction. There are 2 VA systems in outlets in Connecticut?
Actually, there are more than 2.
Really? What are they?
VA Connecticut overall consists of the West Haven main campus and then the Newington campus, which is also rather large. And then we have 6 community-based clinics across the state: Danbury, Stamford, Winstead, Waterbury, Willimantic, and New London.
Wonderful.
And then there's also 4 vet centers. So vet centers are mental health specific centers for combat veterans or for veterans who've experienced military sexual trauma. And those are places for folks to go and have their families involved in their care, and really kind of reintegration is one of the main focuses of those areas.
One of the shocking statistics that I did read about when I was doing some research for today's topic was that there's just a large amount of LGBT veterans that have attempted suicide, exacerbated by the fact that they feel unsupported as in their sexual orientation and gender identity.
Yeah, that's true. LGBT individuals generally are at risk for suicide, and when you particularly look at LGBT identified veterans, that's risk factors as well. I do think that social support is a protective factor. So if you have somebody who you care about or cares about you, even just one person, it makes a big difference in somebody's feeling like they have what they need to keep on going.
Completely.
Now, you know, seems to be a movement to have even a national monument for LGBT veterans. But, you know, while this is still being discussed, I would think that the monument that most exemplifies the dilemma of being LGBT in the military, is the grave marker of Leonard Matlovich, who was the first openly gay person to be included on Time magazine in the early 1980s, and he unfortunately died. He was born from 1943 to 1988 and died unfortunately of HIV and AIDS. But on his tombstone, which does not bear his name, he has the memorable phrase, "When I was in the military, they gave me a medal for killing 2 men and a discharge for loving 1."
Right.
And he is buried in the Congressional Cemetery in D.C., ironically in the same row as J. Edgar Hoover,
Right.
who is, we claim is one of ours too. Good or bad, he was one of ours, but serving in in Vietnam. But at that, I'm so pleased that you guys came, and thank you so much, Dr. Lynette Adams from the VA, Bob Delaney, and Lacey Joy Whitefeather. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.